Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Boss Potato in a 15 plus 10 game on leechess.org. Boss Potato opens with e4. I'm in the mood to play something different. How about a French defense, e6? Hope you French aficionados out there like this. And queen e2 on move 2. Okay, I think this calls for c5, unfortunately. I know this move is taking us away from French waters because now we're in a decidedly Sicilian formation, but the point of queen e2 is to discourage black from playing d5, so I think c5 is appropriate. I'm just going to develop. And Boss Potato says hello. Boss Potato might be a viewer of this channel. I think this player is. Okay, knight f3. So I'm thinking about just developing g6, bishop g7, knight ge7, but I don't want to give white a reason to play e5 quite so soon, but I don't think e5 is even appropriate yet, so yeah, I think g6 is fine. Yeah, and sure enough, Boss Potato says big fan of the videos. That's pretty cool that he watches. Or she. Alright, g3. Let's play bishop g7. And on bishop g2, I think I'm going to stick that knight on e7. This is usually the correct formation for black in my experience. So keep this bishop's diagonal unhindered. I'm still a little bit concerned about e5, but I think with the rest of white's pieces slumbering, like this knight being unable to come into the d6 square quite yet, I think it's acceptable to play without d6 for now, is my thinking. So I'm just going to proceed as normal in these positions. So yeah, d6 is what I'm thinking now. And then you usually want to follow up with b5. Start pushing on the queen side because that's where black has the best play. So let's do it. So now we're in a closed Sicilian sort of position. And I'm curious, yeah, with that move, if Boss Potato is going to try to play in the center with d4. Maybe rook d1 coming next? And whether that should discourage me from playing the plan I'm intending with b5, b4. So let's think. If b5, rook d1, b4, can white just continue d4? We get a trade. My pawn is kind of out here. That could be helpful, I suppose. But I'm also thinking if I want to do something against d4. I could also try to play b6 and quickly stick the bishop on a6 to pin this pawn, but that only seems like a temporary solution. I don't know that that's going to lead to much. So I'm leaning in the direction of b5, rook d1, b4. Play that way. Yeah, let's do that. I think if white plays any other move than rook d1, I'll be pleased, because then b4 seems to get in unhindered, and if white doesn't have d4 to block out my bishop, I'm liking that pressure I have against c3. Hope everyone's had a good weekend. It is Sunday night, almost 7:30 p.m. local time. I was playing around with some settings right beforehand. I was standing up for a while, seeing if I wanted to record this video standing up at my standing desk, but after a couple weeks of use of the standing desk, I found that it's good for getting work done and just like answering emails, just day-to-day things you do on your computer. It's perhaps not so good when recording videos. It just doesn't quite work as well. My concentration isn't what I would like it to be, and also the angle is kind of weird, I feel. Okay, bishop e3, so I can continue as I planned with b4 here. This is another way for white to get in d4, though, so I should pay that some mind. Nah, I like b4. So if d4, I'm thinking take on c3, which will compel white to take with a pawn. And then I might not take after that. And I could take on d4 and then maybe play d5, something like that. But I almost have a mind to keep the tension somehow. So take, and then maybe queen a5, something like that. Yeah, I like the look of queen a5 after the trade on c3. Can even play queen a5 right now, but I think it's stronger after that trade. So let's do it. This is a 15 plus 10 game as opposed to the 15 plus 2 that I usually play. So a bit more of an increment, but I'm still trying to play quicker in the opening. I say that every single time, but I mean it this time, guys. I gotta speed up at the outset of the game. Queen a5 threatens bishop a6. Looks good. I'm mobilizing so quick there. This is a motif I've used a lot in this line. Queen a5 takes. I can still play bishop a6, in fact. Yeah, let's play it. Just going with the gut. In playing the Pro Chess League this year, the inaugural Pro Chess League, I got some good rapid experience at that 15 plus, I believe it was 15 plus 2 time control. And it really impressed on me the importance of getting out of the opening with enough time remaining that you can play a proper middle game, which I gotta say, most of the time in the league, in the matches that I played, I did not manage to do. My time management left a lot to be desired. I think on the whole on the season, I performed right about 50%, so it was right about my expectation as well. But my time management in particular was bad. It's one of my big weaknesses in my game, and it has been for a while. My time management, also I think my openings, and sometimes my calculation, particularly in messy positions. If I'm just going to lay it all out there for you guys. So bishop a6 is on the agenda. I like the fact that I'm the one who controls whether we get to trade these pawns. I don't think white's going to take, because again, if white takes now, that appears to be a mistaken view of bishop a6 with the skewer. If white plays c4, the rook on a1 will hang. So it's always nice to control the tension in that way. I don't think white has to panic or anything, but they may have to make a undesirable move like that, just getting out of the way of bishop a6. So now bishop a6 would come with a tempo on the rook. Probably rook d1 will be the answer. And where to go from there? Maybe take on d4 at that point. Maybe it's time to do it. Take, and then d5. Perhaps. Or even just a rook move. Rook move looks appropriate. Okay, so let's not dawdle over this. Bishop a6, rook d1. After rook d1, white really is threatening to take on c5, though, finally, because they've got the queen and the bishop battery backing it up. I only have 2 defenders. White has 3 attackers. And I can't get another defender here, so I think my candidate moves at this point are either take or push. Not too many other moves. Queen a4 crosses my mind. That does hit the rook. Also adds more pressure here. Thought white could just answer with knight d2, though, which it appears white can. Yeah, I don't think sacrificing the c5 pawn makes any sense. So queen a4 or taking on d4, that's what it boils down to in my opinion. Maybe I can take and then play rook c8 and eventually try to land a rook on c2. I'm looking at that option right now. Still think white's going to develop that knight through d2 though. But maybe then I play d5. Although then knight b3 to c5 isn't the most fun. Is that an argument for c4? So if I play c4, knight here, d5, the idea of e5, knight f5, and this bishop is going to be captured eventually, but the bishop is not even good necessarily inside of white's chain like that. This is an important position. I'm just pausing here for a moment because I think my next decision will be critical. Change in the pawn structures often indicate a critical moment when you have a big change in the pawn structure that's possible. So take. And what's to stop white from just playing knight d2 next move? That's what I need to disrupt. I'm thinking I might want to take, play d5, and then after e5 play rook fc8 and try to recycle this bishop out through the f8 square. I don't even have to play d5 is the thing. I'm not sure why I'm under the impression that d5 is forced or something. Okay, let's take first of all. I think taking is the move that I'm deciding on. I'm not really looking seriously at queen a4 anymore, so it doesn't make much sense to spend time on it. So now rook fc8, just to be flexible. Maybe with the idea of knight b4, huh? Knight b4, try to get into c2. Yeah, let's do that. So I'll keep the pawn here, because if the knight is bound for d2 for white, then it may make sense to keep the pawn on d6 so that knight b3 to c5 is frustrated. And all those lines where I was pushing d5 and white was going here, this was a big problem square. So yeah, just keep this pawn fixed here for now. I want to say Boss Potato and I have played in some of the bullet tournaments on Lichess. I don't know that we played Standard before, but it's possible I'll go back through the archive and see a game that we played in Standard. Okay, knight b4. Threaten some nice things like knight c2 or even knight d3. Knight d3 is a threat. Yeah, attacking the queen. Queen would have to step onto a light square. So on knight b4, I'm thinking knight b3 will be the answer. And then this creeping move, queen a4, appeals to me. Not easy to get rid of my queen when it hits that square. All right, we're moving forward. Any other moves I got to be concerned about here other than knight b3? I don't think so. This is a tender square. And knight c2, I don't think white wants to see knight c2 land. White could play something like bishop f1 to control the d3 square, but if I get that in, the rook might have to move. The bishop's under pressure. The a2 pawn could fall if the rook moves. So problems start to appear in white's position. I'm not going to go to a3 because I don't want white to play bishop a3. Although, now that I think about it, maybe queen a3, bishop c1, queen a4 is possible. A little refinement there. It's kind of fancy, though. Queen a4 was my instinct, and maybe I should stick with that. But now at the last moment, I'm looking at that other move. That's a very close call. Now I'm going to stick with queen a4. I'm not sure. I could burn another minute trying to decide between those two. They both look good, though, so in the interest of time, keeping the pressure on white, let's do it. Queen a3 would control the b2 square, but I'm not worried about queen b2 here. So I don't think I need to rule that move out per se. And knight here, that's probably a good move for white. I like that decision by Boss Potato. Defends these squares. Okay, what now? Rook b8. Gets the rook off that long diagonal with white's bishop. I don't see any immediate tactics because these two squares are controlled. Rook c3 seems like a shot in the dark. I'm not threatening anything with that move. So this move feels appropriate now. Again, d5 I don't think I want to play in view of knight c5. Also bishop c4, huh? Bishop c4 could be a candidate here. Let's go rook b8. I like the look of it. Maybe knight takes a2 will be a threat going forward. With my loose bishop on a6, though, I don't foresee that being a tactic on the next move. Sometimes if your opponent's defending and just responding to your threats, it's useful to play a move like rook b8 where you're just ratcheting up the pressure ever so slightly because they may lash out and do something radical. I don't know that e5 necessarily is going to hurt them too much, but that was the philosophy I was operating under there. Okay, so if d6 moves, again, I got to watch out for knight c5, so let's bear that in mind. This does invite knight f5 or knight d5, however. potential major downside of the move white just played. So I'm looking to see whether I can tactically punish white if my knight gets into f5 or d5 pressure here. So say if knight d5, take on d6 looks critical, knight c3, attacking the rook, and then knight e2 becomes an option. I guess white could just play rook d2 there, though. Maybe no harm, no foul. I could take here, but that invites a capture, maybe opening the dark square bishop. So I think my main candidates will be these moves. So knight ed5, take on d6. Knight c5 is coming next. Maybe that was a reason to play queen a3 before, so that knight c5 doesn't hit my queen. Knight d5 takes... I could move my queen back, like queen d7 or something. Knight c5 take on d6, which is probably not so bad. Although then a3. a3 is a problem there. Could I do something fancy with rook takes c5 if the knight lands on the c5 square? Maybe. Knight d5 takes. Take on e3 takes. Queen back. Yeah, maybe queen back then. Maybe that's the right time to do it. Okay, let's play it. So yeah, I'm thinking takes and take on e3. I know I mentioned that bishop could be bad, but it's such a gatekeeper of d4 and this diagonal in general in view of the d4 pawn, so I think I probably should take it. Also, this knight may very well want the d5 square. Yeah, so I think I'm going to capture that bishop next move, presuming white takes here. So e takes d6, knight takes e3, queen takes e3, queen back to d7. Then I'm playing more for a strategic edge. I'm hoping to prove that this pawn is weak. White does take. So let's capture. On queen takes e3, it's also interesting to play knight takes a2, but I'm not sure that's sound. Just leery of putting myself in a pin like that. The idea there would be knight c5, rook takes c5, takes, and then bishop takes a1, but nah, I think when white can just recapture, it's not going to work. Knight c2 is another move here. Knight c2, take, take, just to get a rook on the second rank. Don't quite trust it, though. Yeah, still thinking queen d7. Queen d7. If a3, knight d5 looks fine. Trade, trade. Two knights versus two bishops. I think my bishop's doing fine there. Okay. So a bit of a bummer that I had to retreat, but the position's still plenty good for black in my estimation. White still has weaknesses, d4 and a2 in particular. I'll probably take this pawn in the next move or two. So lots of reasons to be optimistic. Time could be better compared to my opponent. I'll just try to talk a bit less. I feel like that's an empty promise I've made before. So one semi-forced line, knight c5, queen takes d6, a3. Believe I have to play knight d5 there. Bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5. And probably white's going to want to eliminate my bishop on a6 soon in that line. So let's take. And if white does play a3, which white does, that illustrates why I took on e3, because I need this square available. No other square is working, right? Yeah, knight c6 is just going to drop that. I don't think knight takes d4 is going to cut it in that line. So yeah, let's go here. And I think white will probably take it with their bishop. Even though that leaves their king kind of exposed, this knight is too strong otherwise. Yeah, and white does take it. Be really nice to go queen takes, knight takes a6, and then rook b2 and threaten checkmate. Is that just too far-fetched? I mean, I'm not even threatening checkmate because g2 is guarded. Yeah, don't think that's going to work. It's just kind of a fantasy line I'm spending some time looking at. But okay, we'll take this way. So I still feel that d4 is weaker than d5. The only thing is this knight is probably going to get into the game soon. Most likely via d3 or f3. Still got the two bishops. Maybe white doesn't want to trade this knight for the bishop. I was thinking white would, but perhaps this diagonal isn't that useful for black. Maybe white will just try to get this knight in ASAP. But now that the e-file is open, okay, so white takes. I was going to say, now that the e-file is open, I can contemplate rook e8 ideas. Could even play that right now, but queen d3 is going to be the answer, so now let's take. So, what can I squeeze out of this position? Equal material, but bishop versus knight. So this is the key imbalance right here. Also, maybe the pawn formation. Okay, so this is probably looking to stuff the knight into e5. Can play rook here, which intends to meet knight e5 with f6, winning the piece. So maybe I can chase this queen around for a couple tempi. If I can get my rooks into the second rank, that would be nice. So I think I should also consider rook b2 and rook c2 in this position. Just naturally, I'm thinking of starting with rook e8 because it looks to be an annoying move to white. But yeah, rook b2, rook c2 are also candidates. Rook e8, probably queen d3, but then after the trade, yeah, I get that rook in to e2. Or maybe b2. That's irritating. Okay, rook e8. And it is nice if this knight does come into e5 later when f6 is not winning the knight. I'll have the option of taking it, but I'll also have the option of trying to play around it too, like maybe bishop f8. Okay, white offers the trade. Rook e1 would be nice, but white can take with the knight. So that's not working. Yeah, I think taking and bringing a rook to e2 or b2 is going to be the answer. Just trying to figure out which one. Probably e2. So that knight e5 doesn't cut it off. Okie doke. So trying to utilize this rook, possibly in conjunction with this rook too. White could blunder the game away here. If rook d2 trying to neutralize the rook, then I trade and I take the pawn on d4, which would fork the king and the rook. Only thing I'm kind of wondering here is how big of a threat this move is. If I get to play that, what is my next move? I mean, I check. That's the obvious thing, but white just comes here, and h2 is guarded. Probably they would go to h1. Okay, so this offers a trade. I was actually kind of hoping for that move because then the knight is just further away. So if I trade and play rook b1 or rook b2, probably rook b1, and then maybe get the rook behind the pawn. Yeah, that seems pretty good. So trade, rook b1, king f2, likely, and rook here with bishop f8 in mind. I like it. I could also do something fancy here, like maybe rook e4, but that has more bark than bite because white's not forced to take and get their pieces forked. Could also bring this rook down, double up, but again, I'm not sure the rook is actually so great here, especially if a pair of rooks is traded. So let's go with this option. Pin the knight, king f2 coming almost certainly. Rook e3 runs into bishop takes d4, so I think king f2 is virtually forced. Now I've got this move coming. If knight c2, I can play rook a2 and pin the knight. And there's just multiple pitfalls with this d4 pawn. In that line, knight c2, rook a2, rook c3, bishop takes d4, wins. So I believe this pawn is going to be lost. Which, quite honestly, if I were to pick one pawn on the board I'd like to win of white's, it would be the a pawn. Because that pawn is the furthest away from white's pieces, and especially their king. If I get a past a pawn, white's going to have a hard time stopping that, especially if my bishop gets involved, either through attacking d4 or perhaps more likely repositioning to f8, which will help escort the pawn all the way to a3. Those distant passed pawns in the endgame are so valuable. As the game goes along, the pawns on the wings become increasingly important because of this sort of thing. They can draw the enemy pieces away in the endgame. And another factor with that, white has a knight, a short-range piece. So even if the knight comes over to try to assist in stopping my a-pawn, I might be able to abruptly switch sides of the board, maybe start attacking on the king side, go after some loose pawns over there if I'm able to distract white's forces, and the knight might not be able to help out in white's defense. Yeah, hard to know what to do here for white. I think mainly because this knight is so bad. If white could get the knight in a position to attack d5, they have a chance. But my next move, if allowed, will be this, and the pawn is being lost so quickly. Also, white has a hard time activating the rook, because again, the rook is needed to babysit d4. I'm trying to put myself in white's shoes to figure out what I would do. Maybe knight g2? Is that possible? Knight g2 and then a bishop f8, play knight e3. That would hit d5. Yeah, that might be the best option. If knight g2, I can throw in a check on a2 to try to inconvenience white's king. Make white play king f1 or king f3. King f3 is probably not so bad for white, though. Let's say king f3, bishop f8, knight e3. I can't defend this pawn. I can win h2 or a3, but yeah, this pawn might be lost. Okay, white played knight f3. We'll check that in the analysis. That was an interesting moment. So bishop f8. I'm also thinking about throwing in the check. Maybe the check is useful. Don't know how much time it's worth spending, though, on that move. No, I'm just going to play this right away. Probably I'll have the option of checking on the next move anyways. So quite simply, this is the plan. Bishop takes, push the a-pawn, move the bishop away, and then keep pushing the a-pawn. Very straightforward. And I'm taking with the bishop because I feel like white's rook is just worse than mine. Again, because of that d4 liability. Yeah, so let's take. This knight is stable on e5, but it doesn't threaten much at the moment. Then again, okay, maybe rook b3 or rook c3. White can try to activate. Yeah, this way. I don't know why I was only thinking of rook c3. That was kind of foolish of me. Definitely should have thought about this permutation too. Okay, so I can give this check. Once again, if I want. Just a little worried about the f7 pawn now, though. Yeah, I'm thinking bishop takes a3 was a mistake. Probably should not have played that. What if I just go for it? a5. Probably white checks first, huh? King here, and then rook b7. Don't like that. All right, let's check. Let's just make white think. Maybe if king e3, I can play bishop c1. I'm thinking about that option. And then rook b2 is even opened up. Okay, white goes back. I like to see that. That's kind of passive. So now bishop b2, maybe. Attack d4. Weird looking position for my bishop, but justified, I think. Okay. So that's an important factor. If I'm threatening bishop takes d4 with check, that takes the sting out of rook b8, rook b7. Because now white might have to play a passive move to defend this pawn. If knight c6 to defend, I'm thinking then just play a5. Okay, yeah, passive move. I like to see that. a5, rook here, a4, take, a3. My rook's kind of in the way, but white's position remains extremely passive. Or do I start with a6? Nah, I think either way, white can probably go after the pawn. a5, rook b5, a4 takes. a3, rook here. Okay. It just feels like it has to be winning somehow. It just feels wrong if white can go after the b5 pawn when my a pawn is rushing down the board, but the only thing that makes me nervous is my rook is blocking the pawn. I don't want to get to a situation where I have rook on a1 and pawn on a2, and I can't free up my rook with white's rook sitting on, like, a5, for instance. Yeah, and white's going to test this. As well, they probably should. So, let's do this. So when white takes, maybe I play bishop c3 first. Maybe that's the key. But they have a check here, and then rook a8 to get behind. Okay, well, let's play a3. So if rook a5, let's say bishop c3. Check. King up. Bishop b4. So I have to free my rook somehow. I'm thinking get the bishop to b4 and then play rook b2 and a2 would be the desired plan. But white might be able to do something with the knight in the meantime, if the play goes that way. Knight d2, okay. Wasn't anticipating that. First instinct, check, and then play rook here, or maybe rook h1. Yeah, just a2 is coming after that. Also, bishop c3 looks good. Let's check first, though. See where that king steps. King g2. Okay, so here. Followed by a2. Yeah, looks tough to stop. Okay. So a2 is going to win the knight. Dare I get greedy at this point? I mean, can I go for more? Like rook d3 looks pretty darn tempting too. That knight is so unstable here. a2 should win. a2, rook a5, queen. We're eventually going to win that pawn, but I don't think there's anything wrong with playing rook d3 first. Rook d3, rook b5, I can take. And after the trade, play a2, he takes, I queen. That should be an easy endgame to win. White's king is so open. But also a2 is an easy endgame to win. So I'm just debating between the two options. Let's go for this one. Yeah, and white resigned. Okay. Thanks for the game, Boss Potato. So, this started as a French. This game began its life as a French defense, and then white played queen e2, which is specifically geared towards discouraging d5, because if d5 takes, black would have to take with the queen. Calamity. As a Scandinavian player, right? But the problem is the pawn is on e6, so that's an inferior version of a Scandinavian. I guess white's queen is on e2, but I still don't like it. So I decided to shift gears and play c5 and make it more of a Sicilian type position. We got into this closed Sicilian formation. Usually white's knight is already committed to c3 at this point, but I'm kind of glad white played it the way they did, because this made for an interesting game. White playing c3 and then trying to go d4. And I went for b5, b4. Black wants to complement the bishop with this play on the queen side with the pawns. And I think around about, this area, shortly after the opening, so early middle game, this is where things start to heat up. I was liking my position because I got queen a5 in with bishop a6 with tempo, and then the capture. I believe here I probably made a small mistake in retrospect. I think queen a3 might be better. I'll be curious what the engine thinks, but queen a3 might be better in view of that knight c5 resource that white has when e5 is played later. I know the play is not forced leading up to that point, but on queen a3, if white plays knight e1 like they did to protect here, then e5 is coming, and I may be thanking myself for having c5 protected, but with my queen not on a4. So there's no fork there. So I'll be checking the computer there. In a way, I was happy to see e5 because that does open up squares for my knight, but this didn't prove easy to punish, and maybe it is not punishable whatsoever. Played knight d5, knight f5 was the alternative, might be similar. Trade, and then the queen coming back. Yeah, if my queen were on a3, I probably wouldn't have to play it like this. But it felt necessary to do this to try to gather the pawn. Yeah, so here, take. Maybe after this line and the trade on d5, maybe white shouldn't play bishop takes a6. I'm thinking white might want to play knight e5 right away. unless rook e8 is a good reply. Because the more I look at it, the stronger this knight is in comparison with this bishop. Unless this bishop could get somewhere good and maybe assist in attacking white's king, but I don't see that happening. So I believe after knight takes a6, queen takes a6, black has a bit of an advantage, maybe something like half a pawn. The onus is on white to try to shut down my bishop. And this initiative carried over even after the queen exchange. This looks to be a mistake. And I'm very curious what would happen if white just allowed my rook to come down here. Because it might be an empty threat with the knight guarding h2 at all times. I mean, I can get that check in, but king h1, and what's the follow-up? So if white were to play something like, let's say, rook c1 here, looking to play rook c5 or rook c7, going after these pawns, can I really punish white? That's a key question, I believe. So going to query the computer on that. After this trade, the position might be losing for white because I get the pin in, and then I don't see how white can save the a-pawn. Probably knight g2 to e3 is white's best attempt here at counterplay to try to go after the d5 pawn. Bit of a weird maneuver for the knight, but if knight g2 is played, I can't save this pawn without just giving up my goal of winning this pawn for now. Maybe I could do something like rook b1 to b5 to a5 and then bishop here, but that looks like too long of a maneuver. So knight g2 will be interesting to check out as well. And here I might have made a mistake in taking on a3 with the bishop. Should probably take with the rook now that I think about it, because rook b3 turned out to be pretty annoying with the idea of rook b8 and then rook b7. Take this pawn in white's sights, also the a pawn. I got a little greedy there. I thought that my rook was just superior to white's, but that may not be the case. I mainly threw in this check just to confuse white and try to think on their time. I think Boss Potato should play king e3 or king f3 here. I think it's imperative to keep the king off the back rank. So when you step to g1, that might be the worst possible square, because I know Boss Potato wants to defend h2, but now when I go and attack d4, like bishop takes d4 is such a strong threat that white can't ignore that. So white doesn't have time to do that. Rook check followed by rook b7. Yeah, and I think after this it's done. Now the knight is doomed to passivity, just babysitting the d4 pawn, and the a pawn rolls. I've got a couple logistical issues with my rook blocking the pawn, but it should be too much. This was probably the last chance for white. I think white has to play rook a5 here, get behind the pawn. The knight can't really assist in the defense. But even after rook a5, bishop c3, the knight is corralled. I'm attacking the rook. Probably rook a8 check, king g7, and I think I should win. Probably bishop b4 coming. Rook b2, a2. Okay, so that was a bit of a abbreviated analysis before I click over to the board. But you can do that sort of thing, especially if you're pressed for time. Just having a few different areas in the game, major turning points, critical moments, areas where you thought your opponent made a mistake or you thought you made a mistake and just want to check it. Those are good moments to look at with the engine. So let's click over to the analysis board and see what it says. So just the raw numbers at first. Boss Potato had 1 inaccuracy, 3 mistakes, 0 blunders for a 24 average centipawn loss. I had 2 inaccuracies, 0 mistakes, 0 blunders for a 12 average centipawn loss. Don't think I need to expand on anything that happened in the opening. I think if you're a Sicilian player, this is a setup that you want to get acquainted with if you don't play it already. It's very flexible. This so-called Fischer setup. Very good against these closed Sicilian formations where white is not playing overtly for d4 in the opening on move 2 or 3. So, okay, so the evaluation is pretty steady all the way through here. Get the trade in queen a5. I think all this looks fine. Notice here the eval drops. I wonder if the computer thinks that knight takes is stronger for white. Let's just take a look. With Stockfish 8, courtesy of Lee Chess. Shout out to Lee Chess. Great site. Yeah, knight takes d4 is what the engine thinks, but I also thought white was going to take with a c-pawn. I think for a human, knight takes d4 is a hard move to make because you're pretty much admitting that you just have a worse pawn structure. Pawn looks pretty awful on c3, so I'm not surprised white took that way, because I probably would have done it myself. So c takes d4. Yeah, rook f c8. Computer thinks rook a b8 is a bit better. Not rightly sure. I don't know what rook a b8 does that rook f c8 doesn't. I mean, I know on c8 the file is closed for now, but from a coordination standpoint, this felt good to me, again, because I give the f8 square to the bishop. That seems kind of far-fetched, I know, with this blocked up, but yeah, it's not immediately obvious to me what the difference is. Like, if rook b8, if white just plays knight d2, okay, the computer wants to come in right away. And if knight b3 takes, I can actually grab 2 minor pieces for the rook. It's a nice little line. Okay, so perhaps the immediacy of rook a b8, the fact that I can infiltrate to b2 if white does not have their queen guarding that square, maybe that tips it slightly in the balance of that move. Okay. So rook f c8, yeah, knight bd2, knight dived in, knight b4. Computer says queen a4 first, or rook b8. But ultimately, they're given the same evaluation, so let's explore knight b4, because it looks more forcing, threatening this sort of stuff. Knight coming in, or rook coming in. Yeah, so this was one of my questions. What to do with the rook? a4 or a3? And I see the engine just changed its mind there, too. At first it was saying a3, but now it's saying a4. So if queen a3... Then one nice point is if white plays bishop c1 to reject the queen, then I go here. And this is the same position, except white has voluntarily played this move, which can't possibly help white on developing the bishop. So that's an argument in favor of it. But if queen a3, just knight e1. Yeah, rook b8 again. And say white plays e5 now. Maybe I have a few more options compared to the game. Now, this is that situation I was mentioning takes where this move isn't as big of a threat right away. Still, though, that's not a huge edge in black's favor. Well, maybe it is if I can do this, though, yeah. Take on a2. And we've got the double threat here with no knight c5 to worry about because of the pin. Okay. Still saying queen a4. Sometimes the longer you give the engine to think, it'll change its mind, but it seems to be sticking with queen a4. I know my setup isn't all that powerful in the world of computer analysis. My friend Tony Rotella, who has a YouTube channel as well, you might want to check him out. He plays a lot of standard games, so if you like standard, rapid games, you'll probably like his channel, but he plays correspondence chess, and a while back he was telling me about his setup. He has some sort of super cooled setup with like 1,000,000 cores. Okay, not literally 1,000,000 cores, but you get the picture. And he was telling me about the correspondence games he plays where engine use is allowed, and in fact it's mainstream, like you have to use an engine to be competitive at high-level correspondence. And he'll give a position to his computer setup, assign it all these cores, and have it think overnight. And sometimes it'll produce drastically different moves than what it produces right away when you just turn on the engine and it gives that snap evaluation. So I think computing power, hardware, is important with these top-level engines. But I think even for my purposes as an IM, the evaluation of Stockfish 8 after 30 seconds is more than enough for most of my play, like 99% of my play, unless I'm preparing some very specific opening against a grandmaster or something. Yeah, here now, it changed its mind to queen a3. So that's inconclusive, I suppose. If we investigated this further, maybe we'd find the truth, but I think appreciating that difference is important. So queen a4, yeah, knight e1 was a good move by bosspotato. Nice find there, controlling c2 and d3. I'm glad it approves of this rook b8 move. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on that move, it just felt right. This is the only piece I haven't included yet. And it increases the pressure ever so slightly. Maybe allowing for rook takes a2 stuff. So rook b8, e5. Okay, so e5, the eval goes up. Knight f5 is the supposed answer. Did I just miss that after knight f5 and take, I can take with a knight? I think I just outright missed that this might be possible. I know I can still play knight c5, but this looks like something I should consider. Yeah, I don't know why I had it in my head that d5 was the better square to go to, because I was considering both, but for some reason I settled on d5. So if knight f5 take, is there some other way to punish white? So here, I guess now if knight c5 we take, and the fact that I still have d5 available for this knight, but I haven't traded this knight for the bishop on e3 yet, that could give something for black. Okay, yeah, I could definitely see that. So some position like this, whoa, knight d3, that's pretty radical. Knight d3, pressure on d4. So if take, okay, that's a total computer line. Don't think I would see this line or venture it in a game. I was thinking the computer was going to take here and try for bishop takes d4. Oh, but then knight f2. Nasty. And if takes, take here. Okay, I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole in that line, but you get the picture. So yeah, maybe knight f5 has some benefit over knight d5. If I'm going to take on e3 on the next move, then it doesn't matter, but maybe I should have given knight f5 a bit more thought. So knight d5, take. Yeah, I took... Computer wants to go back right away, but I thought there was a tactical problem with that. Maybe it just transposes, but here, knight c5, take, a3. Yeah, that'll just transpose, okay. Because this is what I was trying to avoid by trading on e3, is this situation where this knight's under attack, none of these squares are safe, and if I go to c6, my bishop will hang on a6. That was why I needed that d5 square freed up. My knights are superfluous pieces. Superfluous knights. First learned of that concept when I was going through some books of Mark Dvoretsky. Rest in peace. Okay, so knight takes e3, queen takes, queen back to d7. So I think this is an important moment, and this shouldn't shake your mindset in chess when your primary plan, which for me was to try to generate something on the queen side, like breakthrough onto the second rank, maybe land some sort of tactic with my great activity here. But when your primary plan doesn't pan out, don't feel like your position and your game and you as a chess player are a failure just because you have to change plans. Like, that happens all the time, even for good players. So here I went into a different mode where I'm just trying to gather the d6 pawn and prove that d4 and a2 are weak. Yeah, and this line seems semi-forced. Okay, now here was another question. Computer approves... Well, yeah, again, it changed its mind. I think I was posing some good questions here for self-analysis, because the fact that the computer's kind of switching between the two means that even the engine thinks it's a close call. But I really don't know. Like, let's say white had played knight f3 and declined to trade the knight for the bishop. Like, how strong is this bishop in comparison to this knight? Ah, bishop takes d4. That's a tactic I did not see. So that removes the defender of the knight. It straight up wins a pawn, doesn't it? White has some nice blockade going here, but pawn's a pawn. Okay, that's something I missed. Great example of why the engine can help so much tactically when you're analyzing right there. So maybe the fact that bishop takes d4 is such a threat means that the trade should be made. I was also thinking knight d3 could be tried, but yeah, knight d3, I guess I can take this one. And if rook takes, the same tactic is working, huh? Take. We get into some sort of endgame where black's up a pawn, double rook endgame. And black will still have to work hard to win this. So we get the trade. Knight comes to f3, which looks correct. Yeah, rook e8. We still have this slight initiative. So one of the main points of this move is that if knight e5, I have f6. And this knight is pinned. Aha, but even here I missed something, which the computer points out instantly. Queen d3. Unpinning with a gain of time because my queen is attacked on a6. It's a nice move. But then queen a4. Okay, so avoid the queen trade. Guard the c6 square. d7 is also guarded. And white has to bring their knight somewhere kind of awkward, maybe. And black is still getting play even here. So this seems to check out. But yeah, even there, knight e5, f6. White has that saving queen d3 move. Interesting. So as played, queen d3. We get the trade. Can white go anywhere else with the queen? Anywhere else, it looks like I can gain some time. I mean, if queen f2, probably rook e2. Other moves maybe at black's disposal, but rook e2 just stands out. So queen takes, rook takes. Yeah, rook here. And I'm using that rook because, as I explained in the game, if I play rook b2, I was a little concerned white would play this and block my rook from infiltrating down the file. Maybe I can switch files, but that's why I chose rook e2. Okay, and now rook e1 is the top move of the computer, which will be intriguing to investigate. But my question was, what if white just ignored this? So what if I just played rook c1? I double. What is black really threatening here? Well, I could throw in a check and make me play bishop f8, but okay, let's just play the top move of the computer. Because this is what I was referring to. If I check, which looks like the logical follow-up, white just steps here, and this knight does such a good job of defending h2, I don't know exactly what I'm going for. Even if I play this move, trying to kick the knight, I'm not in fact threatening anything, because if rook takes, my rook on g2 would hang. Maybe rook f2 or something. Computer likes this. Not quite sure why. Maybe that in mind, or king g7 simply. Black looks to have control, but for the moment, white has everything defended. So I wonder if rook e1 is possible in view of that line that I was mentioning during the game. So after the trade, rook b1, king f2, rook here. Yep, that's the move for boss potato. Knight g2. White has to play knight g2, I think. Be surprised if there was any other move in order to generate enough counterplay to try to hold. Knight e3, attack d5. That's the key. Get the knight angled at d5. Otherwise, losing a3 is too much. Okay. It really felt like white was in trouble here. But I think if both of us were concentrating a little harder and or had more time, knight g2 would have appeared on the board. So I guess that's on boss potato, but it's not the easiest move to play. It doesn't look right in a sense, but when you think about where the knight should be angled towards, what it should be attacking, it does make sense. Yeah, I don't think any other move is good. So that means for me that maybe just rook a1 is a mistake. So what does the computer want me to do? Rook b2 check. King moves. Go pick up the h2 pawn, b up a pawn, okay. What if white is greedy and plays after rook check, just king g1. Now rook a2. White can still go here. Bishop f8, knight e3, take. Okay, so we get to an endgame where I might have some chances to win based on this outside pawn. Another situation where the outside pawn is more valuable than the central pawn in the endgame because it's going to distract white's pieces. Okay, so again, going ahead in the game. So that was one of my inaccuracies here, was rook a1, according to the computer, even though it felt so natural at the time. So instead, knight f3, bishop f8, knight e5. Yeah, and here, inaccuracy number 2. All right. Also, as I suspected, like immediately in the game, I said, probably I should have taken with the rook. I think I was wrong. So bishop takes. Yeah, if I take with the rook, should I win this endgame? Probably. Knight c6, I can play a6, guard the pawn. Just follow this line here. Knight here, maybe looking for some sort of check, or knight b6. Yeah, you can see how the a-pawn becomes a huge problem for white just right off the bat. White has to go through some contortions to try to stop it. Yeah, good winning chances for black with the king about to come up. So on bishop takes, rook b3 was very nice. And now I threw in the check. Yes, and this was probably the most important moment of this endgame. Because if white steps to f3 or e3, it's not going to be easy to win for me. But king g1, on the other hand, this felt pretty straightforward after this with bishop b2. So maybe f3 is better because e3 does allow bishop c1 check. Even there, not so easy, but okay, king f3, bishop b2, rook b8 here. Yep, there's that rook b7 move, pinning this pawn. Take, check, king here, rook here. Yeah, and suddenly my a pawn doesn't look as threatening with my king open. Also, the d5 pawn is hanging. Likely to get into some drawish looking endgames. Take here. Black's up a pawn, but hey, it's a rook endgame where white's pretty active. Rook d7 coming next if I defend the pawn or something. So king g1. Let's just see if white could do anything after this. Bishop b2, knight f3, a5, valuation climbing for black. Rook b5. Yeah, give up the d5 pawn. It didn't feel right to defend that pawn. Okay, maybe bishop c3 is a little more accurate. I was wondering about that or something similar during the game. But a3, yeah, that's losing. Okay, so what if white plays, we'll look at rook c5 in a second, but what if white plays rook a5 like I thought during the game? f6, prophylaxis against knight e5 maybe, or just give the king some running room? I probably would have played bishop c3. Bishop c3, rook here. You can see my dilemma, right? This rook is hard to move because if ever I check and then play that a2 move, thing is I can't move this rook away without just running into rook takes a2. So I'm not entirely certain how I'd win here, but what if white just starts pushing the d pawn? Bishop c3, rook a4, king up. Yeah, I might need to enlist the help of my king. Start it marching over, try to stop this, or maybe even go attack the rook in some cases. This configuration looks so dominant, but it's not immediately apparent how I win. And on rook c5, why is rook c5 so good? Maybe just because it stops bishop c3. On rook c5, again, it wants me to start bringing my king over. Just playing through a sample line. Rook comes behind the pawn, stopping a2. Yeah, again, black is getting some king activity. I'd say in a practical game, it's pretty darn tough to hold this for white without falling for some tactical trick. But in computer land, it's not a proven win yet for black. Yeah, knight d2 on the other hand. I think after that check, then just go attack the knight. It's over. Yeah, the a-pawn's running away. And I paused a little bit here. I know I was low on time, but I was just trying to win in the cleanest way. A2 versus rook d3. I think I could justify doing that. I just thought with the knight being so unstable, just go and attack the knight. And if rook b5, I could just sack right away if I wanted. Like that. And this endgame will be winning. White's king is too open, and we've got enough pawns. Even with no pawns, king and queen versus king and rook is a win for the side with the queen. Okay. That was an instructive game. So, takeaways from this game. I like the setup I had out of the opening. I think I would repeat this setup. And in fact, I've used this queen a5, bishop a6 idea in some games before, including a rapid game that I remember that went kind of eerily similar to this, actually. I'll try to link it up if I remember. It was against... can't remember the player's name. I don't know why I would think I would remember it, but sometimes I remember random player names like that. I can find it, though, in my archive. So if you're interested, I'll link that. So, yeah, the moments I was keying in on, I think, were instructive moments to enlist the help of the engine. That technical task in the endgame kind of surprised me. I was almost certain I was just close to winning here, if not outright winning, but chess is surprising sometimes. Like that knight g2 to e3 resource could have derailed my winning attempt completely, and maybe white just survives. So it was a very competitive game. So thanks for the game, Boss Potato. If you have any comments, definitely feel free to post them on YouTube. And I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. I'll be back again with another video very soon. All right, bye guys.